Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today we're going to be doing a vampire deck profile. So I'm really excited for this one because this deck has been a while since I actually profiled it, and I made this one really interesting for you guys. I got a lot of comments on the previous list that asked me not to use the Zombie World engine, and so I kind of played around with it and made this really interesting build that actually doesn't use Zombie World. And it really works. Like, don't click away, it actually is really insane. I'm really excited to show you guys this because it's an old concept that I actually came up with for vampires a long time ago, and I saw it and was like, wow, that actually works. So, anyways guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and don't forget to check out the Patreon because we have some awesome rewards for you guys, like getting your name description for every single video, getting a signed card sent in the mail, or even getting a requested deck profile every single month that you're a patron, along with test hands. So, without further ado guys, let's get straight on into this. So first off, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Scarlet Scourge. So Scarlet Scourge is one of the monsters that you want to play at 2 to 3. I prefer 3 in this particular build, because this card has a really neat effect that if this card is normal or special summon, then you can pay 1,000 life points to target a vampire in your graveyard and special summon it, but it can't attack this turn, which is not that big of a deal, because usually you're going to be using your monsters for synchro plays or link plays, so that's not that big of a deal to just get rid of them off the field, or summon out a copy of Vampire Fraulein to be able to get them to be able to have higher attack points. It also has the ability that at the end of the battle phase, if this card destroyed an opponent's monster by battle, then you can special summon that monster to your side of the field from your opponent's graveyard. We then play a single copy of Vampire Shadow. Vampire Shadow is actually a very pivotal card in this particular deck, because you want to be able to special summon vampires from the deck. Because when this card is normal summoned, you get to special summon a dark vampire monster from your hand or deck, except another copy of Vampire Shadow. And if you do, only dark XYZ monsters, and if you do, only that monster can attack. And this card can only be used for a dark XYZ, or if you're going to XYZ summon this card, you're only going to be able to use it for a dark XYZ monster. Now that's not that big of a deal, because the only XYZ monsters that we play in this entire deck is Vampire Sheridan and Vampire Brum, because you just need those monsters. We then play a single copy of Vampire Lord. Vampire Lord is a card that you can play or you can drop out. It totally is up to you. I personally like playing it because if it's destroyed by an opponent's card effect, then you can special summon it from the graveyard, and when it inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you declare one type from monster, spell, or trap, and your opponent has to send one of those to the graveyard. Now, depending on what you're playing against depends on how well this works, because if you're playing against a deck that really uses just a few trap cards, like maybe an Evenly Matched, or maybe a copy of Infinite Impermanence, you can really get a card out of your opponent's deck that could be a pivotal player in, affecting your plays. But if you call monsters, usually your opponent's going to like that. We then play a single copy of Vampire Duke, which when it's normal summoned, you get to target a vampire monster in your graveyard and special summon it. And if this card, when this card is special summoned, you get to declare a monster, spell, or trap, and then your opponent sends one of the types from their deck to the graveyard. You can only use each effect of it once per turn, and it also has the ability that you cannot use this card for an XZ summon except for a dark XZ monster. We then play a single copy of Vampire Fraulein. Fraulein, when a monster is involved in a battle, then you can special summon her from your hand, which is really cool. And she also has the ability that you can pay life points in increments of 100 all the way up to 3,000, and then make a monster on your side of the field gain that many attack points equal to the amount that you paid if a zombie monster is battling, which is pretty cool. I play a single copy of Red Baron. Red Baron, once per turn, you can pay 1,000 life points to target a monster your opponent controls, and one vampire you control, and switch control of those monsters, which is pretty cool. I like that effect to be able to switch the control of a monster. It's basically like creature swap, and if he destroys a monster by battle, then you get to revive it during the end of the battle phase as well, which is pretty cool. We play a single copy of Vampire Vamp, which is a really neat card in this deck, because Vampire Vamp helps out the deck so much in being able to dig into the deck and use her ability to kind of like relinquish an opponent's monster. Because once per turn, when a card or a vampire is normal summon to your side of the field, then you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls whose attack is higher than this card's, and you equip that monster to this card. And she also has the ability that she gains the combined original attack of all monsters equipped to this card, and if she's sent to the graveyard while equipped with a card by this effect, you get to special summon her. So you're going to want to dig into the deck to get her out as quickly as possible. We play 2 copies of Vampire Sorcerer, because if this card is destroyed, in your possession is sent from your possession to the graveyard, then you get to either add a vampire spell or trap from your deck to your hand or a vampire monster, and you can also banish this card from your graveyard to be able to normal summon a vampire without tributing. We then play 3 copies of Vampire Retainer and 3 copies of Vampire Familiar, which share the exact same effect, but they search different things. Vampire Familiar and Vampire Retainer both share the ability that if this card is in special summon, then you get to pay 500 life points, and then you get to add either a vampire monster or a vampire spell or trap from your deck to your hand. And if this card is in the graveyard, then you can send a vampire card from your hand or face them from your field to special summon this card, but banish them when they leave the field, which is a really, really, really good effect. We then play a couple of generic zombie cards, which is 2 copies of Mizuki. You can banish them from your graveyard to special summon a zombie, which is pretty good. 3 copies of Unizombie, which is hands down the best zombie in the entire game. And this card is actually the playmaker of the entire deck. You want to get to this card as quickly as possible. You can either discard a zombie or send a zombie monster from your deck to the graveyard to increase a monster on the field's level by 1. Really pivotal effect, and really important for a play that you'll see later. Now, the play that I'm actually going to go into with this deck is actually Ultimaya Tzolk'in. So you guys are probably wondering, oh my god, how are you doing that? Well, the way that you actually go into Tzolk'in is you boost up your Unizombie by sending a monster from the deck, and then sending a monster from the hand to the graveyard, which will boost him up to level 5, and then either getting Shadow, Vampire Lord, or Fraulein or Duke on your side of the field, and then send them to the graveyard, which is very, very, very easy, especially with your Vampire Retainer and Familiar, to be able to search spells and traps and monsters that are vampires is really important to get out your copy of Ultimaya Tzolk'in, which then you just have to set a card, and you can special summon out a copy of Beals, Void Ogre, or Crystal Wing to your side of the field, which is a really amazing thing, especially if you're backing it up with a copy of Vampire Domain, where it can negate any card at all, and then you gain life points if it's a monster. We then play 2 copies of Shiranui Solitaire, which is to special summon out our copy of Unizombie from the deck. For the last 3 monsters, we're playing 3 copies of Ash, because having a Domain, a Crystal Wing, or a Void Ogre, and a copy of Ash on the field is 3 negates, and that's pretty good. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Let's get into the spells. And I know it's a lot of monsters, but zombies just use a lot of monsters in all of their decks, except Eldritch. We then play a single copy of Called by the Grave, because Called by the Grave just helps the deck a lot. 2 copies of Vampire Desires. Vampire Desires is pretty good, because you get to target a face-up monster you control, and then you send a vampire monster from your deck to the graveyard, and that monster becomes the level of that vampire that you sent. So you can really, if you don't have another copy of, say Vampire Lord or any of those monsters, you can level manipulate to get that monster to level 5 with Vampire Desires to make Tzolk'in, which is pretty nice. Or you can target a vampire monster in your graveyard to send a monster you control to the graveyard if you do use special summon the target from the grave, which is pretty good to help you get Vampire Vamp back from the grave. We play 3 copies of Vampire's Domain. Domain is probably one of the best cards in the entire deck, because it lets you once per turn pay 500 life points to normal summon an additional vampire, and also you can also, each time your vampire monster inflicts damage to your opponent, you gain life points equal to the damage that they dealt, which is really, really good. Especially since basically it's the, vampire thing. As they lose life, you gain it, which is pretty cool. We then play 3 copies of Vampire Kingdom. I know it's been a while since I've actually played this card, and this card is really good, actually. Its effect comes up sometimes. It lets zombie monsters gain 500 attack during the damage calculation, which is alright. And then once per turn, when a card is sent from your opponent's deck to the graveyard, you get to target a card on the field and send a Dark Vampire from your hand or deck to the graveyard, and if you do, destroy that target. So this deck comes in really handy and can surprise your opponent, because if a card is sent from your opponent's deck to the graveyard, then you get to pop a card on the field and Foolish Burial card out of your deck, which is really good, especially if you're sending cards from your deck to the graveyard like Familiar or Copy of Retainer or whatever you need to send to the graveyard to get more plays, especially if you're playing against a deck maybe like Burning Abyss, Lightsworn, Eldritch, decks like that. That Foolish Burial stuff is just really, really, really good. So that's it for the spells, guys. Let's get into the traps. So for the traps, we are playing a single copy of Vampire Takeover, 2 copies of Vampire Awakening, and 2 copies of Vampire Dominance. This is really, really, really good, or a domain, or domination, excuse me. Basically what this card does, with all 3 of these different traps, they're really, really, really good. That takeover is if you control no cards in your field spell zone, then you can activate a Vampire Kingdom from your deck, and then you get to special summon a Dark Vampire from your graveyard as well to your side of the field. And you have to control 1 face-up monster that's a zombie type, which is not that hard to actually do with all the cards in the main deck being zombies, even the hand traps. Vampire Awakening lets you special summon 1 vampire monster from your deck, but you destroy it during the end phase, which comes in super handy if you're going to special summon out a copy of like Vampire Retainer, Vampire Familiar, or another monster out from your deck that can activate its effects. Then Domination is just really good because when a spell trap or monster effect is activated, while you control a vampire monster, you can negate the activation if you destroy that card. Then, if it was a monster card, you gain life points equal to the amount that you, equal to the attack of the monster, which is really good. So, that's it for the main deck, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. By the way, this is the card that I usually set when I summon out to Tzolk'in and search it with my copy of Retainer. We then play 2 copies for the extra deck. We play 2 copies of Vampire Sheridan. This card comes up quite a lot in the deck, especially with this build. It comes up quite a lot. You can use monsters with a level that is owned by your opponent by treating it as a level 6. And it also can help you out a lot because you can detach a material from this card and then target a card your opponent controls and send it to the graveyard. And then once per turn, if a face-up monster card is sent from the field to the graveyard, or on your opponent's graveyard by a card effect or a monster effect, destroyed by battle, is sent to your opponent's graveyard, you can detach a material from this card to special summon one of those monsters to your field in defense position, which helps you get out a second copy of Vampire Sheridan. We then play a single copy of Crimson Knight Vampire Braum, which is pretty cool because it's actually, Braum is the author of Dracula, and that's actually why they made this card, which is pretty cool. It also has the ability that you can detach a material from this card, target a monster in your opponent's graveyard, special summon that target to your side of the field, but if you do, only that monster can attack for the rest of the turn. And it also has the ability that during the standby phase of the next turn after this card you controlled was destroyed by your opponent's card, either by battle or by card effect, and sent to your graveyard, you can special summon this card back in face-up defense, which is pretty cool. We play 2 copies of Vampire Sucker, because sometimes you do need the suck. We play a single copy of Ultimate Tzolk'in. Ultimate Tzolk'in is so easy to summon in this deck. Normal summon you in a zombie, send a copy of Vampire Retainer to the graveyard, special summon the Vampire Retainer by sending a zombie from your deck to the, vampire card from your field or your hand to the grave, and then use Vampire Desire, and increase its level by sending a vampire to grave, and then link them together to summon out to Tzolk'in, which is pretty cool. We then play a single copy of Void Ogre Dragon to be able to negate spells, Beals because it's a good beat stick, and a single copy of Crystal Wing. Crystal Wing is really good and really easy to summon because it just negates monster effects. 1 copy of Cyframe Lord Omega because you want to summon Omega just to be able to deal with your opponent's hand, and it's a zombie deck, so it really helps out getting your banished cards back into the graveyard. Access Code Talker because it helps you OTK your opponent. Nightmare Unicorn to spin stuff. Phoenix to pop spells and traps. Cerberus to pop monsters. And then a single copy of Avenged Savior because it can help you send zombies from deck to graveyard. And then a single copy of Linkuriboh because you do play level 1 monsters in this build. So that's it for this deck, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. I hope I lived up to the justice of vampires being played without Zombie World, because everybody was requesting, like, man, every zombie or every vampire deck plays Zombie World, and I just want to see a deck that doesn't. And so I wanted to build a way that you could actually play it, especially around Halloween time, that you guys could see how to play this deck without Zombie World, which it can be played with, and it's really good with Zombie World, but you can also play it this way that's more of a pure variant, which is what I pride myself in building a lot of the times, is pure variants of decks. So anyways, guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell on there so you can become part of the notification squad, and test hands coming soon for this deck. Definitely for vampires, especially for one of my favorite zombie decks of all time. So anyways, guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist, and we'll see you guys in the next video. And don't forget to check out the Patreon. See you later, guys.